The great rift tore across the heavens above Sanctus Heliara, like an infected wound bleeding violet light onto cobblestone streets, where pilgrims had walked for 10,000 years. In the Basilica of the Woundless Throne, Confessor Malachai Vorn raised his power maul high rosarius, swinging from his neck as he bellowed liturgy to the assembled faithful. His voice scraped raw from 3 days of continuous sermon. The Emperor protects, but we must prove worthy of his gaze. The stars themselves burn with accusation. Confess your weakness, purge your doubt. 15,000 pilgrims knelt in the nave, pressed shoulder to shoulder, their penitent robes stained with ash and blood from self-flagellation. The cathedral bells rang in discordant sequences, their bronze tongues vibrating out of rhythm as magnetic storms from the rift disrupted ancient mechanisms. Incense smoke hung thick, unable to rise in the fluctuating gravity, pooling around ankles like fog. But something changed during the third repetition of the Litany of Atonement. The hymnal drones emanating from Vox speakers embedded in the basilica's Gothic arches began to warp. High notes stretched into metallic scraping, low chants deepening until they became subsonic pressure against the chest. Pilgrim Jeremiah pressed his palms over his ears, but the sound bypassed physical barriers, resonating directly in his skull. Not sound at all, images. A field stretched before his mind's eye, bathed in impossible silver light. Grass swayed beneath skies too blue to belong to any world he knew. In the center stood a figure distant, but somehow closer than his own heartbeat. Hair the color of starlight, eyes that held neither warmth nor cruelty, only certainty. The vision released him. Jeremiah gasped, forehead striking stone as he collapsed forward. Around him hundreds did the same. Moans of ecstasy mingled with confused weeping. An elderly woman clutched her prayer beads hard enough to draw blood from her palms, muttering words in no language taught by the ministorum. "The promised land," she whispered. "He showed me the way home." Confessor Vorn descended from the pulpit boots, echoing through the disrupted hymnal drone. He moved between the prostrate faithful power maul, deactivated but ready. His training recognized potential corruption, but this felt different from demonic taint. There was no rot stench of Nurgle, no maddening geometry of Tzinch, no bloodlust shriek of Khorne, no seductive whisper of Slanesh, just silver certainty. "What did you see?" Vorn demanded, grabbing Jeremiah by the collar and hauling him upright. The pilgrim's pupils were dilated, unfocused. "Peace," Jeremiah breathed. "A place where we are wanted, where we belong." He called my name. "Who called?" "The Seraph, the Silver Seraph." Vorn released him, stepping back as the phrase rippled through the crowd like contagion. Other pilgrims took up the chant, their voices finding harmony where the corrupted hymnal could not. Silver Seraph. He knows us. He sees us. Silver Seraph. The confessor activated his comm bead broadcasting on ecclesiarchy frequencies. "This is Vorn at the Basilica. We have a potential Xenos mimetic event. Request immediate inquisitorial assessment." Static answered. The rift interference had worsened. By the fourth day, the visions had spread beyond the Basilica. Factory workers on assembly lines dropped their tools mid-shift, staring into middle distance as the same silver field unfolded in their minds. PDF troopers on the city wall turned their laser guns away from the void, facing inward toward the cathedral district, as if called by trumpet. Children in Schola Progenium dormitories woke from nightmares of the Imperium to find themselves crying not from fear, but from longing for something they could not name. Vorn stood in his Spartan cell reviewing pict captures on a data slate. Every captured image showed the same details. The field, the sky, the figure at the center too distant to resolve clearly. Yet everyone who saw the vision could describe him perfectly. Silver hair, cyan eyes like winter ice, a presence that promised rest to the weary. The confessor's hand trembled as he set down the slate. For 40 years he had served the ecclesiarchy, teaching that rest came only through death in the emperor's service. That peace was heresy. That to desire anything beyond dutiful suffering was to invite corruption. Yet, when he closed his eyes, he saw the field too. An older cleric knocked and entered without waiting for permission. Brother Ossian had survived 3 Black Crusades, his face a map of scar tissue and augmetic replacement. He carried a brass censer, sacred smoke trailing behind him, but even that traditional incense smelled different now. Cleaner, sharper. The pilgrims are gathering at the central plaza, Ossian reported, his mechanical voice box clicking between words. Thousands. They bring offerings. Flowers that do not grow on this world. Fabrics woven in patterns not recorded in any archive. They claim the seraph teaches them in dreams. Dreams? Vorn repeated flatly. Not waking visions now. Both. The phenomenon accelerates. Ossian's remaining biological eye met Vorn's gaze. I must confess, Malachi. Last night I dreamed of the field. In my dream, I had both my eyes again. I could feel the sun on skin I lost to frostbite on Fenris. The seraph stood before me and said... The old cleric's voice cracked. He said I had suffered enough, that I could rest. And you believed him? I wanted to. Ossian's augmetic hands clenched. Emperor, forgive me, I wanted to. Vorn grabbed his rosarius, the holy symbol cold and heavy against his palm. Then we increase the mortification rites, triple the hours of self-abasement. We must drown this temptation in pain and prayer. I gave that order 6 hours ago, Ossian replied. The faithful obey, but the visions grow stronger. Pain no longer drives it away. Some say the seraph appears in their suffering now, offering to carry the weight. A sound interrupted them. Not the discordant bells or warped hymnal, but something new. Singing clear and pure, rising from the plaza outside. Thousands of voices finding perfect harmony without training or direction, weaving a melody that made the air itself feel lighter. Vorn moved to the narrow window and looked down. The plaza teemed with pilgrims, their penitent robes replaced with cloth of silver and white. They had woven garlands from native thorn vines, but the thorns had somehow been transmuted into something resembling crystal, refracting light into rainbow patterns across the cobblestones. At the plaza's center, they had erected a symbol. Not the aquila, not the fleur-de-lis of the ministorum. A simple pillar of salvaged metal beaten and shaped by hand into something that resembled a sword thrust into stone. Silver paint scavenged from maintenance supplies covered its surface. The crowd pressed flowers and prayers and blood offerings at its base. This is how cults begin, Vorn whispered. His theological training cataloged the signs. Shared visions, rapid behavioral modification, symbols divorced from approved iconography, mass gatherings without official sanction. Yet nowhere in his mental checklist did he find the usual markers. No one demanded violence. No one called for overthrow of established order. They simply knelt and sang and offered and waited for the seraph to manifest. Ossian stepped beside him at the window. I sent astropath transmission to the Sector Inquisition 3 days ago. No response. The rift blocks everything. Then we contain this ourselves. Vorn turned from the window, decision hardening in his chest. Lock the basilica. No one enters or leaves. Double the PDF patrols. Anyone preaching about this seraph is to be detained for questioning. We purge this corruption before it takes root. Malachi. Ossian's tone carried warning. These are not heretics. These are pilgrims who came here seeking the Emperor's grace. They are frightened. The rift tears reality above them every night. The astrological omens promise nothing but darkness. Then they see this vision, this promise of rest, and you would call it corruption. I call it what it is. Xenos manipulation. Warp trickery. A snare for the faithful. Vorn pulled his power maul from its hook on the wall, meglocking it to his belt. The Emperor's grace comes through service and sacrifice, not dreams of silver fields. As if in response to his declaration, every bell in the cathedral district began to toll simultaneously. Not the broken arrhythmic clanging of malfunction, but a single pure note that resonated in bone and blood. The singing in the plaza swelled to match it, thousands of voices becoming one voice, and in that unified sound, Vorn heard something he had never encountered in 40 years of service. Not defiance, not worship of false gods, not the gibbering madness of chaos, just absolute terrible faith in something that was not the Emperor. In his quarters at the astropathic spire blind, Seer Kaldis screamed blood and fell from his meditation throne. His attendants caught him before he struck the floor, but his fingernails had already torn furrows in his own face, trying to claw out the vision that burned behind his empty sockets. Not the Emperor's light, he gasped through ruined lips. Not chaos filth, not demon dream or Xenos glamour. His voice dropped to a whisper so intense it cut through the bells and singing. Something ancient, something that remembers what we have forgotten. It calls itself home, but it does not belong here. The attendants tried to sedate him, but Kaldis gripped the lead servitor's arm with strength belying his skeletal frame. Send word. Tell them there is a song in the Imperium now, and it has no mercy in it. Only certainty. His blind eyes leaked tears of blood. Tell them the Silver Seraph waits, and waiting is all he has ever done. The transmission died in static before it left Sanctus Hilaire's atmosphere. The rift interference saw to that. But in the depths between stars, where the warp churned against reality's skin, something listened to Kaldis's warning and smiled without lips. Waiting, after all, was simply another form of inevitability. The orbital picket destroyer Mortal Clarity held position at Anchor Point 7. Its lance batteries tracking the Shrine World's northern hemisphere, where congregation patterns had metastasized beyond acceptable thresholds. On the bridge, Inquisitor Lord Severian Kessel reviewed threat assessments with the dispassion of a surgeon examining tumorous tissue. His power sword rested maglocked at his hip. The bolt pistol in his shoulder holster had killed 3 governors and 1 cardinal in his 40 years of service. Both weapons were blessed, maintained, and waiting. Astropathic interference has reached Category 5, reported his interrogator, a pale woman named Thessaly, whose augmetic left eye clicked as it processed data streams. All outbound transmissions degrade within 1,200 kilometers of the planet's ionosphere. Incoming traffic fragmented or absent. Kessel touched the console, calling up stellar cartography. The Great Rift dominated the display like an infected artery across the galaxy's width. Sanctus Heliara sat too close to that wound, a shrine world of negligible strategic value that had suddenly become a convergence point for something his instrumentarium could not classify. Warp signature analysis, he said. No inflection. Command as fact. Thessaly keyed the relevant files. Triangulation confirms concentrated immaterial activity centered on the Basilica district. Choir attempts to probe the phenomenon resulted in 3 deaths, 7 permanent catatonic states, and 12 cases of localized glossolalia. Show me the recordings. The hololith flickered to life. A bound astropath sat in a reinforced interrogation throne, silver restraints crossing her chest and temples. Her handler, a null-adapted servitor, monitored vital signs that spiked as the recording began. The astropath's mouth opened. What emerged was not Gothic, not any language indexed in inquisitorial archives. The sounds possessed mathematical structure, each syllable carrying harmonic resonance that made the recording equipment vibrate in sympathy. Then, blood, from eyes, nose, ears. The astropath convulsed once and went still, her brain matter crystallizing into geometric patterns visible through her ruptured sockets. Kessel stopped the playback. Warp signature delta, compared to standard chaotic manifestation. Minimal overlap. Thessaly brought up comparative analysis. No identifiable marks of the ruinous powers. No corruption spread patterns matching Nurgle, Tsinch, Khorne, or Slanesh. The immaterial taint reads as... She paused, searching for adequate terminology. Organized, directional. Purposeful in ways that demon seed is not. Classification. Pending, my lord. Current designation Sigma 7 anomaly. Potential for Omega reclassification if manifestation pattern continues. Kessel absorbed this. Sigma 7 meant unknown Xenos influence or unclassified warp phenomenon. Omega meant extinction-level threat, requiring immediate cyclonic torpedo authorization. The gap between those classifications represented the margin where his judgment would determine whether 3 billion souls lived or burned. Deploy cordon assets. Establish void superiority perimeter. Nothing leaves atmosphere without my personal clearance. He turned to the Vox officer. Transmit to Battlefleet Command. Ordo Malleus invokes Article 17. All naval elements within 6 systems are hereby requisitioned for containment operation. The officer's hands moved across control surfaces, sending encrypted burst transmissions that would take hours to reach their destinations through rift interference. By then, Kessel would already be planetside. Prepare my shuttle. I want a full tactical squad, 3 null-adapted specialists, and a sanctioned psyker rated for hostile mind contact. He paused at the bridge exit and summoned the Grey Knights. If this entity manifests, conventional forces will not suffice. The planet's surface greeted him with incense and blood. Kessel's shuttle touched down on a fortified landing pad 2 kilometers from the Basilica district. Astra Militarum elements had already established a hard perimeter, armored chimeras positioned at intersections, while guardsmen in full hazard gear directed civilian traffic away from contaminated zones. Red quarantine banners hung from requisitioned buildings, their high Gothic warnings stark against faded stone. A commissar approached uniform crisp despite the ash falling from distant fires. He saluted with mechanical precision. Inquisitor, Commissar Radek Sanctus Heliara, PDF. We've established inner and outer cordons per Ordo protocols. Civilian resistance has been minimal, but persistent. Resistance? Kessel's tone held no curiosity, only the expectation of data. Pilgrims attempting to reach the Basilica for worship. We've detained 417 in the past 6 hours. Standard interrogation reveals identical testimony visions of a figure they call the Seraph Promises of Sanctuary, compulsive need to congregate. Radek gestured toward a processing center where PDF troopers guided shuffling civilians into barred transports. Some resist verbally, most simply walk toward the cordon until physically restrained. Have any been shot? 12, my lord. Failure to comply with lawful dispersal orders after 3 warnings. Radek's voice carried no apology. Bodies incinerated per contamination protocols. Adequate. Kessel moved past him toward the processing center. Inside, rows of detainees sat on bare rock-crete hands bound with plasteel restraints. Their eyes held the same quality he'd seen in cult exposures before belief so total it erased survival instinct. But their skin showed no mutation. Blood samples revealed no taint markers. Even aggressive psychic probe produced nothing except that same directional pull, like compass needles swinging toward an unseen magnetic pole. An elderly man met Kessel's gaze without fear. "You cannot stop this," he said. His voice carried the educated diction of a former administratum clerk. "We have seen what awaits. We have been chosen." Kessel drew his bolt pistol in a fluid motion and fired once. The man's head disappeared in a spray of bone and mass reactive detonation. The other detainees flinched but did not scream. Several closed their eyes, as if in prayer. "Burn the body," Kessel told the nearest guardsman. "Interrogate the rest individually. Document all testimony. Execute those who resist. Sterilize those who comply." The guardsman saluted. "Sterilize, my lord." Chemical castration and neural dampening. They returned to the workforce as nullified assets. The Imperium wastes nothing. He left the processing center and moved toward the inner cordon, where the real work waited. His tactical squad had established a command post in what had been a Schola Progenium Administratum building. Inside, tactical displays showed heat signatures, electromagnetic anomalies, and warp disturbance readings layered across district maps. A tech priest in crimson robes bent over a cogitator array mechadendrites interfacing directly with data streams. Inquisitor, it voxed in binaric cant, the Kessel's translation implant rendered as clipped gothic. The phenomenon exhibits expansion characteristics incompatible with standard corruption models. Affected radius increases by 0.07% hourly. At current trajectory, planetary saturation occurs in 42 days. Projection assumes linear growth. Affirmative. Variable acceleration factors may reduce timeline significantly. The tech priest's organic eye, the only visible flesh beneath layers of blessed machinery, fixed on Kessel. Recommend immediate exterminatus authorization to prevent vector escape. Premature. We do not burn worlds on projections. Kessel studied the thermal scans. Where is Confessor Vorn? Basilica Central Complex, my lord. He refuses evacuation orders. Typical ecclesiarchy obstinance. Kessel activated his comm bead. "This is Inquisitor Kessel to Confessor Vorn. Respond." Static hissed for 3 seconds before Vorn's voice crackled through. "Inquisitor, we are conducting purification rites. Your interference is unwarranted. Your rights are irrelevant. I am assuming operational command of this district under inquisitorial authority. Evacuate your clergy immediately. You overstep Kessel." Vorn's anger bled through the Vox distortion. This is a matter of faith, not military containment. The Emperor's servants will cleanse this corruption through prayer and penance. Your pilgrims are already vectors. 23% of your congregation now exhibit compulsive behavior patterns. Your prayers amplify the phenomenon rather than suppressing it. Kessel's voice remained flat clinical. "Evacuate now, or be designated a hostile asset." The line went silent. Then, "You would threaten the Ministorum. I would preserve the Imperium. You have 1 hour to comply." He severed the connection. Thessaly appeared at his shoulder, data slate extended. "My lord, the Grey Knights acknowledge our summons. Estimated arrival 72 hours. Justicar Thane will lead the strike element. Acceptable. Prepare containment protocols for Basilica breach. If Vorn does not evacuate, we breach regardless." Kessel turned to his tactical sergeant, a scarred veteran with 30 years of Deathwatch service. "Assemble demolition teams. I want charges placed at structural stress points throughout the Basilica complex. Minimum collateral spread." The sergeant's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "My lord, there may still be thousands of civilians inside. Then they die purified." Kessel's hand rested on his bolt pistol's grip. "Better to burn in the Emperor's name than serve some Xenos aberration. Theology may argue over their souls. I concern myself only with containment." Above them, the great rift painted the sky in shades of bruised purple. Ash continued to fall. In the distance, hymns rose from the Basilica district, voices finding harmony that should not exist without training, without direction, without anything except that pull toward the figure waiting in everyone's mind. Kessel listened to those hymns and calculated acceptable losses. The equation was simple. 3 billion lives against the potential of universal contamination. The margin for error was 0. And somewhere in the Basilica, something waited that did not bleed, when cut did not scream, when purged did not die, when killed by conventional means. His vox crackled again, this time an astropath's voice ragged with pain. Inquisitor, the entity, it knows we're here, it knows what we're planning. Impossible. We have maintained calm security. It doesn't need our transmissions, my lord. The astropath's breathing came in wet gasps. It reads us. Intention, purpose, will. It reads us like we read books, and it's... The voice cut off in a scream that lasted 3 seconds before terminating in the sound of crystallizing meat. Kessel closed his eyes. When he opened them, his expression had not changed. Aim classification, he said. This is now an Omega-level threat. Prepare exterminatus authorization codes. If the Grey Knights cannot contain this entity in 48 hours, I will burn Sanctus Heliara to bedrock. Thessali's augmetic eye word. Confirmed, my lord. Cyclonic warheads are being armed. Outside, the hymns continued. And somewhere beneath stone and faith and 10,000 years of prayer, something that had been waiting for longer than the Imperium itself began finally to move. The Thunderhawk gunship, Sanctified Wrath, translated from high orbit in a controlled burn that painted the night sky with promethium fire. Inside the assault bay, 10 Grey Knights stood in consecrated silence, their aegis armor inscribed with wards that drank ambient light. Justicar Enoch Thane gripped his nemesis force halberd, the Psi Matrix, within its blade, already thrumming in anticipation of demonic contact. His helmet display showed tactical overlay. Target designation Omega-7. Basilica Central Nave. Projected hostile psyker rating beyond standard classification thresholds. The rest of his squad maintained ready positions around the teleport homers. Storm bolters maglocked to armor each warrior, a weapon forged in secrecy and sanctified against the ruined powers. Brother Casimir carried psych-out grenades. Brother Hadrian bore the chapter's warding staff, its rune-carved surface already beginning to glow with gathering psychic force. No pre-assault liturgy today. The anomaly had demonstrated awareness of inquisitorial surveillance. Any vocal preparation risked alerting it. Thane accessed the tactical feed from Kessel's command post. Thermal scans showed the basilica interior packed with heat signatures arranged in geometric precision around a single cold spot at the altar. Whatever occupied that space did not register on standard auspex. The gunship's assault ramp slammed open. Thane stepped into teleport range and activated his personal beacon. Reality folded. The squad materialized inside the basilica in perfect tactical formation. Each warrior positioned to create overlapping fields of fire and mutual ward coverage. Storm bolters came up instantly, targeting systems acquiring hundreds of civilian heat signatures, kneeling in concentric circles around the altar. But Thane's attention locked on the figure standing where sacred relics had once rested. Tall, human morphology, hair the color of burnished steel fell past shoulders clad in black leather that bore no imperial insignia, no chaos marks, no Xenos corruption indicators. The blade in his right hand extended longer than any combat knife, its edge catching cathedral light with mirror precision. Cyan optics met Thane's helmet lenses without flinch or hostility. Just observation. Clinical assessment. The way a craftsman might examine tools before beginning work. The kneeling pilgrims did not scatter or scream. They remained motionless at heads bowed, as if Grey Knight intervention was simply another phase of ceremony. Thane broadcast on squad frequency. Formation deliverance, wards maximum projection, psych out on my mark. His brothers shifted into practiced positions. Hadrian planted the warding staff, and protective energies billowed outward in concentric shells of blessed silver light. The kneeling civilians showed no reaction to wards that should have burned corruption-tainted flesh like acid. Target, Thane spoke through helmet vox amplification. In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, identify yourself. The figure tilted his head fractionally. When he spoke, his voice carried no distortion, no demonic resonance, no psychic pressure, just calm statement of fact. You cannot categorize what you do not comprehend. Storm bolters fired. 10 weapons unleashed, synchronized volleys, mass reactive shells converging on the target from calculated angles designed to eliminate evasion vectors. Each round carried blessed silver tips and sanctified cores blessed against immaterial corruption. The shells never struck. Sephiroth moved. Not teleportation, not warp transit. Simple acceleration beyond what standard human physiology should permit, but within ranges Thane had seen from Xenos elites. The figure flowed between projectile trajectories, blade rising to intercept 3 rounds mid-flight. Each shell detonated against tempered steel that should not have withstood mass reactive warheads, yet the blade emerged unmarred. Thane processed this. Fast, but not impossibly so. Skilled with edged weapons. Danger close protocols. Casimir deploy, psych out. All units advance, suppress, and contain. Brother Casimir primed the specialized grenade and hurled it in a calculated arc. The weapon detonated at optimal dispersion altitude, flooding the altar area with anti-psychic particles designed to disrupt warp-based abilities and force demonic entities into temporary corporeal vulnerability. Sephiroth stood in the expanding cloud without flinching. No visible reaction to materials that should have crippled any psyker. Thane marked this data point and transmitted. Target demonstrates resistance to standard anti-warp countermeasures. Escalate to direct engagement. The squad advanced in disciplined formation. Brother Mikhail swung his nemesis force sword in a sanctified strike arc, while Brother Hadrian provided covering fire from the left flank. Standard Grey Knight doctrine layer blade and bolt never allow the enemy to predict attack vectors. Sephiroth's response demonstrated combat experience that transcended doctrine. He read Mikhail's attack in the micro-adjustments of armor articulation, the subtle shift of weight distribution that preceded the swing. Stepped inside the force's sword's arc and placed one palm against Mikhail's chest plate. Not a strike, just contact. Then Mikhail saw Hadrian's storm bolter aimed at his own position for exactly 0.3 seconds. Armor transponders showed friend. Targeting displays showed foe. Neural conflict produced hesitation. Sephiroth had already moved. Mikhail's force sword completed its arc through empty air while Hadrian's bolt shells struck the altar stonework where the target had stood. Thane processed the engagement. Perceptual manipulation. Duration minimal. Effect sufficient. Formation shift. Phalanx configuration. Do not trust individual targeting. His warriors collapsed into tighter formation, overlapping ward fields, creating a unified defensive shell. This sacrificed mobility but eliminated isolated engagement opportunities. Sephiroth observed the adaptation without concern. He rotated his blade once, a gesture both casual and preparatory. Thane activated his force halberd to maximum output. The weapon blazed with psychic resonance, its sanctified edge capable of sundering demon flesh and disrupting immaterial constructs. He struck with precision earned through 2 centuries of combat against entities that defied natural law. Steel met blessed adamantium. The impact released concussive force that shattered altar stone and sent kneeling pilgrims sliding backward across polished floors. Sephiroth's blade held against the force halberd without buckling, absorbing kinetic energy that should have sheared molecular bonds. Thane felt feedback through his weapon's psi matrix. The opposing blade carried no psychic signature, no warp taint, yet it resisted with absolute firmness. Like striking architecture rather than wielded steel. Brother Casimir attempted flanking strike while Thane held the blade lock. Sephiroth shifted his stance infinitesimally, and Casimir's angle of attack aligned perfectly with Thane's position. The Justicar disengaged, rather than risk friendly fire from his own battle brother. Another demonstration. The anomaly won through timing and spatial awareness, not overwhelming supernatural force. Thane broadcast. Target exhibits combat precognition or enhanced predictive modeling. Adjust engagement parameters. Execute Code 77. The squad responded instantly. Code 77, complete sensory blackout and synchronized assault. Brother Hadrian activated the warding staff's secondary function, flooding the altar area with blinding sanctified light, while Thane's helmet systems switched to thermal imaging, overlaid with motion prediction algorithms. The Grey Knights struck as 110 warriors, moving in coordinated assault from multiple vectors. Sephiroth stood at the convergence point and turned once. His blade traced a perfect horizontal arc. Not a wild swing, but a measured cut angled to intersect 6 incoming weapons simultaneously at optimal defensive geometry. The ring of steel on ceramite and blessed adamantium created harmonic resonance that made the cathedral's foundations vibrate. When the light cleared, Sephiroth remained in the same position. The Grey Knights had been forced to break their assault pattern or risk striking each other in the confined space his defensive rotation had created. Thane reassessed. This was not demon corruption or warp sorcery. This was martial expertise combined with perception that operated on timeframes shorter than human reaction speeds. The anomaly read body language, predicted intent, exploited the inherent limitations of coordinated assault in enclosed spaces. Dangerous, lethal to conventional forces, but not invincible against Grey Knight doctrine if they adapted properly. All units withdraw to secondary perimeter. Prepare teleport extraction. The order went against every instinct, but Thane's tactical assessment was clear. This entity had demonstrated capacity to dismantle his squad through superior positioning and timing. Continuing the assault would produce casualties without containment. Better to extract data and coordinate with Inquisitor Kessel for revised approach. His warriors executed the withdrawal with characteristic discipline. Storm bolters provided suppressing fire, while the squad collapsed back toward teleport beacon range, maintaining formation integrity. Sephiroth did not pursue. He stood amid the altar wreckage, surrounded by kneeling civilians who had not moved during the entire engagement. His blade lowered to ready position. Those cyan optics tracked the retreating Grey Knights with the same clinical assessment they had shown at first contact. Thane felt certainty crystallize in his enhanced cognition. The anomaly had deliberately calibrated its response to wound pride rather than bodies. It wanted them to leave, wanted them to report. Sanctified Wrath, this is Justicar Thane. Initiate emergency extraction. The teleport homers activated. Reality folded again, pulling the Grey Knights back to the gunship's assault bay. As Thane materialized aboard the Sanctified Wrath, he removed his helmet and activated direct vox to Inquisitor Kessel's command frequency. My lord, target engagement unsuccessful. The anomaly demonstrates combat capacity exceeding standard threat models. It employs precision timing and perceptual manipulation rather than brute supernatural force. Kessel's response came flat and immediate. Casualties, none. The entity could have inflicted lethal damage, but chose restraint. Thane paused, weighing his next words. It wanted us to survive the engagement, my lord, to carry this information back. Elaborate. It fights to demonstrate capability, not to eliminate threats. Every tactical decision was calculated to humiliate rather than destroy. Thane accessed his helmet recorder and transmitted the engagement footage. This is psychological warfare combined with surgical violence. It wants the Imperium to see what it can do. Static filled the Vox for 3 seconds before Kessel responded. Acknowledged. Maintain orbital position. I am escalating to final sanction protocols. The Vox cut off. Thane stood in the assault bay, surrounded by his battle brothers. Each warrior bore minor armor damage, where Sephiroth's blade had deflected their strikes with millimeter precision. Not deep enough to penetrate ceramite plating, but visible proof of control that exceeded human limitation. Brother Mikhail broke the silence. Justicar, what manner of Xenos employs such tactics? Thane did not answer immediately. His centuries of service had taught him to recognize patterns, to categorize threats according to established taxonomies. Daemon, Xenos, mutant, heretic. This anomaly fit none of those classifications cleanly. I do not know, he admitted. But I know what it intends. It has just declared war on the Imperium, and it wants us to understand the terms. Below in the basilica, Sephiroth stood alone among the kneeling faithful. He raised his free hand and observed the faint tremor in his fingers. The Grey Knights had forced him to move faster than this body preferred to calculate trajectories in time frames that strained even his enhanced perception. They were skilled, disciplined, dangerous if properly coordinated, insufficient. He turned his attention toward the cathedral's shattered ceiling, toward the orbiting ships and the minds aboard them, now recalculating threat assessments. Let them see. Let them understand what moved among them, and let that understanding drive them toward the choices he required. Outside, ash continued to fall. The great rift pulsed overhead. And throughout Sanctus Heliara, 3 billion souls went about their dying civilization's routines, unaware that their world had just become a proving ground for something that measured its patience in epochs rather than years. Space bent around the basilica 3 hours after the Grey Knights withdrew. Not the violent tearing that accompanied demonic incursion, but a calculated distortion that folded geometry into configurations impossible under natural law. The air shimmered with equations, written in light, each rune character bleeding colors that human optics were never designed to process. Sephiroth stood at the epicenter of this mathematical intrusion and waited. The 1,000 suns emerged from the warped topology like scholars stepping through library doors. Their armor bore the colors of ancient Prospero cobalt and gold, covered in script that predated the Imperium by millennia. Rubric Marines moved with the stiffness of animated armor, containing only dust and sorcerous will, their bolters tracking potential threats through helmet lenses that saw in spectrums beyond electromagnetic. At their center walked Asek Ahriman, chief librarian of a legion that no longer existed in any form the Imperium would recognize. His black staff pulsed with contained power, drawing ambient warp energy into stable channels through sheer intellectual dominance. He stopped 10 meters from where Sephiroth stood among the still kneeling pilgrims. Those ancient eyes, visible through his helmet's psychic hood, studied the anomaly with the same clinical interest a naturalist might show toward a newly discovered species. Fascinating. Ahriman spoke in high Gothic rendered archaic by 10,000 years of isolation. You stand outside the great ocean's current, yet create ripples that extend across sectors. The architect's children have been discussing you. Sephiroth's expression remained unchanged. The Rubric Marines held position within human stillness. The changer of ways offers knowledge to those who serve its purpose. Ahriman continued circling slowly. You intrigue it. A consciousness that exists in the material realm, yet operates according to principles the warp cannot categorize. Tell me, what would you call yourself if not Daemon Xenos or human? Ascended, one word, delivered with the certainty of mathematical proof. Ahriman's helmet tilted fractionally. The gesture suggested amusement, despite the concealing ceramite. Ascended. How delightfully arrogant. And what precisely have you ascended from? Limitation. The chief librarian extended his black staff in 9-dimensional diagrams, materialized in the space between them. Warp topology rendered visible through sorcerous geometry, showing stellar positions, immaterial currents, and the massive wound that was the great rift bleeding across reality's skin. Then let us discuss limitations, Ahriman said. You have impressed the Grey Knights, attracted inquisitorial attention, made yourself known to forces that will not rest until you are classified, contained, or destroyed. His gauntleted finger traced a route through the displayed coordinates. But you lack the tools to exploit this situation. You are a blade without a sheath, powerful but directionless. You offer direction, Sephiroth's tone carried no inflection. A question stripped of curiosity. I offer architecture. Ahriman gestured, and the diagram shifted to show rift structures in hideous detail. The great ocean tears itself against reality's barriers. These wounds hemorrhage soul's energy possibility. You have observed how the Imperium responds to such breaches. They burn worlds. Precisely. Exterminatus. The crude solution employed by those who fear complexity. Ahriman's staff drew new lines through the hovering mathematics. But what the Imperium sees as catastrophe, others recognize as opportunity. A rift properly stabilized becomes a doorway, a conduit between realities that even the anathema's corpse throne cannot seal. Sephiroth watched the diagrams evolve. His mind processed the underlying theory with speed that would have impressed even the chief librarian had Ahriman known how quickly the stranger absorbed millennium-old warp mechanics. You speak of controlled collapse, Sephiroth said. Creating stable passages through tiers in space-time. I speak of suturing the great ocean's wounds with threads of will and geometry. Ahriman's helmet turned toward the kneeling pilgrims surrounding them. Your followers generate spiritual resonance. Their faith in your promise creates cohesion where there should be only chaos. You have already begun the first step without realizing its significance. The diagram shifted again, showing 3 components in crystalline clarity. Psychic shock. The explosive release of soul energy required to pierce dimensional barriers. Ritual geometry. The specific spatial arrangements that gave structure to formless warp stuff. Anchoring will. The consciousness strong enough to hold a wound open against reality's natural healing. The Imperium provides the first component whenever they declare exterminatus. Ahriman explained, his voice taking on a lecturer's cadence. Billions of deaths all at once. Such magnitude creates shock waves in the immaterium that can be redirected by one who understands the proper vectors. And the geometry? Sephiroth asked. I provide the calculations. Ahriman's staff tapped against stone, and symbols etched themselves into the basilica's floor in burning script. Tzeentch's architect has gifted me with knowledge of cosmic suture, the angles required to maintain rift stability, the harmonic frequencies that prevent collapse. In exchange for observation, Ahriman moved closer, close enough that a normal warrior would have felt threatened. The chief librarian showed no such concern. You are a variable the great schemer cannot predict. This troubles it, which means it fascinates it. I am authorized to provide technical assistance in exchange for the opportunity to study how you interact with forces you should not be able to manipulate. Sephiroth considered this. The offer was layered with traps any fool could identify. Tzeentch never gave without extracting payment in ways the recipient would not anticipate. Ahriman served the changer of ways, which meant every word carried ulterior architecture. But the knowledge itself was genuine. Sephiroth could verify that by the mathematical elegance of the diagrams still hovering in the air. The theory was sound. The application required only execution. I do not serve, Sephiroth stated. I never suggested you would. Ahriman spread his hands in mock concession. Consider it a transaction between equals. You require cosmic infrastructure. I require data on an unprecedented occurrence. We each gain what we need without compromising our respective positions. And when your god attempts to claim what it believes I owe, then you will respond as you did to the Grey Knights, with absolute rejection delivered through superior positioning. Ahriman's tone carried something that might have been respect. The great schemer respects strength even when it defies prediction, especially when it defies prediction. Your refusal becomes data, which has value in itself. Silence stretched between them. The rubric Marines maintained their positions, dust-filled automatons awaiting commands that might never come. The kneeling pilgrims showed no awareness that two beings were negotiating over mechanisms that could reshape their reality. Sephiroth spoke. "Show me the coordinates." Ahriman's staff flared with triumph barely concealed. The floating diagrams expanded, revealing stellar cartography that included systems unknown to Imperial archives. Ahriman highlighted specific clusters. Here, he indicated a junction where 3 minor rifts converged near the Pariah Nexus. The Necrons maintain null field generators that stabilize local space. Their technology provides excellent scaffolding for more creative applications. Acquire one functioning node matrix, and you possess the framework to anchor rift geometry indefinitely. The Necrons will resist, of course. They are territorial about their infrastructure. Ahriman traced secondary routes. But you demonstrated capacity to dismantle coordinated opposition. A lone infiltrator with your capabilities could acquire what you need before their tomb fleets mobilize. Sephiroth absorbed this. The logic was sound. The risk was calculable. The reward aligned with his requirements. And after I possess the anchor mechanism, you wait. Ahriman gestured toward the orbital cordon surrounding Sanctus Heliara. The Inquisition will escalate. Kessel has likely already authorized final purge protocols. When he orders exterminatus, you position yourself at the epicenter with anchor technology active and ritual geometry prepared. The planetary death provides the shock. Your will provides the anchor. My mathematics provide the suture, creating a controlled rift to an alternate reality, creating a doorway you can traverse at will. Ahriman's staff drew one final diagram, a silver thread stretched across dimensional barriers, held open by mechanical precision and indomitable consciousness. Your promised land rendered accessible through Imperial incompetence and Thousand Suns scholarship. A symbiosis of convenience. Sephiroth studied the thread diagram. It represented possibility, freedom from this universe's constraints, access to resources and power structures beyond the Imperium's reach, all purchased through cooperation with forces he would never fully trust. One modification, Sephiroth said. I select the target reality, not you, not your god. Ahriman inclined his helmet in acknowledgement. Acceptable. The destination is irrelevant to our interests. Only the mechanism matters. Then I accept the exchange. Knowledge for observation. Infrastructure for data. Excellent. Ahriman raised his black staff, and the hovering diagrams compressed into crystalline data forms that drifted toward Sephiroth like attracted moths. They dissolved on contact, transferring their information directly into his consciousness through methods that bypassed normal sensory channels. Coordinates, equations, ritual components, node configuration specifications, all the technical requirements for suturing reality. As the transfer completed, Ahriman stepped back. One final detail. The Black Legion advances on this sector. Abaddon seeks to claim the Great Rift's expansion for his own purposes. He would very much like to acquire you as a symbolic figurehead. I am no one's figurehead. I anticipated that response. Something in Ahriman's tone suggested satisfaction. Which means when the despoiler arrives, you will demonstrate that you cannot be claimed. Another useful data point for my archives. The chief librarian turned toward his rubric marines. Space began folding again, preparing to extract the Thousand Suns contingent. We shall observe your progress with great interest, Ahriman said, as geometry warped around him. Do try to survive the exterminatus. It would be disappointing to lose such a unique test subject. Then he was gone. The rubric marines evaporated like smoke. The equations written in light faded back into theoretical obscurity. Sephiroth stood alone once more among his faithful, now carrying knowledge that would let him transform apocalypse into ascension. Above Sanctus Heliara, Inquisitor Kessel issued the final authorization codes. Cyclonic torpedoes armed themselves in launch tubes. Countdown timers began their inexorable descent towards zero. The Imperium would provide the shock. Sephiroth would provide the will. And somewhere in the spaces between realities, Tzench's architect watched equations unfold that even its immortal intellect found challenging to predict. Lord Admiral Lysandra Holt stood on the bridge of the battlecruiser Retribution's Hammer and read the authorization sequence for the third time. The parchment bore Inquisitor Kessel's rosette seal in crimson wax, the skull and eye symbol, pressed deep into official fibers. Beneath that, 14 alphanumeric codes, each one verified against her command console's encrypted database. All confirmed authentic. She handed the parchment to her second officer. Verify again. The man's augmetic eye clicked through verification protocols. Authorization confirmed, Lord Admiral. Inquisitorial seal matches registry. Codes are valid for cyclonic torpedo deployment. Holt activated the fleet-wide Vox. Her words would reach every vessel in the cordon, every captain who had maintained orbital blockade for the past 96 hours. This is Lord Admiral Holt. Exterminatus protocols are now active. All non-combat personnel evacuate to designated safe zones. Weapons officers assume firing stations. Compliance officers log all actions per Administratum Directive 779. She switched to direct channel with her gunnery master, a grizzled veteran named Torch, who had served through 4 purge operations. Master Torch, load cyclonic warheads, target planetary core. Authorization code follows Omega Crimson 77 Judgment Absolute. Acknowledged, Lord Admiral? Torch's response came flat professional. No hesitation, no emotion. Cyclonic torpedoes loading. Estimated time to firing solution 8 minutes. 8 minutes until 3 billion souls became acceptable losses. Holt pulled up population statistics on her command throne's integrated display. Sanctus Heliara Pilgrimage World. Minimal industrial output, negligible strategic value. Primary export faith. Current status compromised by Xeno's class anomaly, exhibiting Omega-level threat characteristics. The math was simple. 3 billion here versus countless trillions across the segmentum. Contamination vectors projected planetary saturation within 31 days, then system-wide spread within 3 months. The margin for error had collapsed to 0. She activated internal Vox to the ship's confessor. Father Grendel, the crew will need absolution protocols after this action. Prepare your liturgies. The Emperor provides, Lord Admiral, came the response. Those who die in his name die blessed. Those who execute his will carry no sin. Empty words that made the necessary bearable. On the planet's surface, PDF forces had pulled back to the secondary cordon. Commissar Radek watched through magnifiers as the Basilica district burned. Not from conventional fire, but from phosphor shells his troops had lobbed into civilian zones when evacuation attempts failed. The pilgrims had refused to leave. Most had simply knelt in the streets, facing the cathedral, singing that damned harmony that required no training. He had ordered executions, then sweeping fire, then incendiaries. They died singing. Sir, his Vox operator reported. Fleet signals indicate exterminatus sequence active. We have 7 minutes to reach minimum safe distance. Radek looked at the readout showing PDF casualties. 412 dead, 900 wounded, all from suppression actions against unarmed civilians. The numbers would appear in after-action reports. Someone in the Munitorum would file them under acceptable collateral during Xenos containment operations. All units withdraw to evacuation points. Double time. He took one last look at the burning city. May the Emperor forgive what we could not prevent. The Chimera transports roared to life, retreating toward designated safe zones that would still be within the blast radius, but far enough to maybe possibly survive the shockwave. Aboard Retribution's Hammer Master Torch watched his gunnery crews complete loading protocols. Each cyclonic torpedo massed 40 tons their warheads, containing viral payloads that would ignite planetary atmospheres and crack tectonic plates through cascading fusion reactions. 3 torpedoes. Standard loadout for Shrine World Purge. His crews moved with practiced efficiency. These men and women had performed this duty before. They would perform it again. The Imperium's survival demanded such instruments, and they had volunteered to be those instruments. Firing solution locked. His lead targeting officer reported. Impact calculations confirmed. Detonation sequence primed. Torch activated direct Vox to the bridge. Lord Admiral, weapons ready. Awaiting final authorization. In her command throne, Holt closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Not prayer, not hesitation. Just acknowledgement that this moment would define her legacy more than any battle she had won, any foe she had destroyed. She opened them. Fire. The word carried through Vox systems to every weapon station. Master Torch's hand moved across the activation panel, entering the final sequence. 3 launch tubes vented. Magnetic accelerators engaged. The torpedoes departed their housings with force that rocked the battlecruiser despite its massive displacement. Chemical thrusters ignited, pushing the weapons toward terminal velocity. They fell toward Sanctus Heliara, like judgment rendered in metal and physics. Onboard chronometers marked descent 6 minutes to impact. Deep within the burning Basilica district, Sephiroth stood at the center of equations he had inscribed across an entire city block. The mathematics Ahriman provided had been elegant in theory. Implementing them in the material world required precision that would have broken lesser minds. Runes etched in stone formed concentric circles radiating outward from his position. Each symbol connected to the next through lines of force invisible to standard perception, but clearly visible to anyone who understood how the Imperium pressed against baseline existence. The pattern formed a mandala of cosmic surgery, waiting only for the shock that would let it cut. Around him, those pilgrims who had survived PDF suppression fire knelt in their assigned positions. They did not understand the mathematics they helped anchor. They simply maintained faith that their seraph would deliver what he had promised. Their certainty created psychic resonance. Small. Insufficient by itself. But when combined with what the Imperium was about to deliver, adequate for his purposes. 5 minutes to impact. Sephiroth raised Masamune. The blade's edge caught firelight from the burning city, reflecting it in patterns that seemed to fold space around the reflection. He had studied the torpedo trajectories through stolen Imperial Auspex data. Calculated detonation points with precision the Navy's own cogitators would have envied. The warheads would strike in sequence. First torpedo northern hemisphere, second southern. Third equatorial targeting the planet's molten core. The third detonation would crack tectonic plates. That moment when billions died simultaneously and the planet itself screamed, would create psychic shockwaves sufficient to pierce dimensional barriers. If he positioned correctly, if his calculations held, if the stolen Necron anchor technology he had not yet acquired could be simulated through pure will and spatial manipulation. 3 minutes. The torpedoes entered upper atmosphere. Friction heated their armored casings to temperatures that would have vaporized unshielded human flesh. Onboard guidance systems made final trajectory corrections, compensating for atmospheric density and planetary rotation. 2 minutes. PDF. F-forces in their chimeras felt the air pressure change. Something massive was falling from orbit, moving faster than sound-dragging ionization trails that painted the sky in shades of chemical fire. Roddick ordered his driver to accelerate. The transports pushed their engines past recommended limits. Behind them, the city they had failed to save burned like a pyre for civilizations that made wrong choices. 1 minute. Lord Admiral Holt watched the countdown on her tactical display. Each number represented uncountable deaths, infrastructure destroyed, history erased. She had ordered this. She would carry it. The Imperium demanded such burdens from those who commanded. 30 seconds. In the Basilica ruins, Sephiroth shifted his stance. The mathematics surrounding him began to glow with light that existed in spectrums human optics could not process. The kneeling faithful gasped as their nervous systems registered energies they had no framework to understand. He raised his free hand, fingers splayed, each digit aligned with specific coordinate in the three-dimensional space he was about to violate. 10 seconds, the torpedo struck. Northern Hemisphere impact released viral payload that ignited atmosphere in chain reactions covering half the planet. Oxygen became plasma. Cities vanished in microseconds. Millions died before their neurons could register pain. Southern Hemisphere followed. The planet's rotation created asymmetric blast wave that tore cloud formations apart and boiled oceans into superheated steam. Equatorial strike punched through tectonic boundaries. The planet's core, already stressed by dual impacts, destabilized. Magma chambers ruptured. Continental plates shattered along fault lines that had remained stable for millions of years. 3 billion deaths in the span of 6 seconds. The psychic shockwave that erupted from simultaneous mass mortality struck the warp like a hammer against glass. For exactly 0.7 seconds, the barrier between material space and Imperium fractured along stress lines, invisible to conventional sensors. Sephiroth moved, his mathematics activated. The inscribed runes blazed with power drawn from dying souls, whose terror and agony created the exact frequencies required for dimensional surgery. The pattern he had created acted as lens-focusing unfocused psychic scream into coherent cutting force. Space tore, not the wild hemorrhage of chaos incursion. A controlled incision following predetermined vectors. The equations Ahriman provided gave it structure. The anchor point Sephiroth maintained through absolute will gave it stability. The dying planet's screaming billions provided the energy. A wound opened. Precise, narrow, reaching through dimensions toward coordinates Sephiroth had selected from possibilities Ahriman's stellar cartography revealed. Blue sky became visible through the tear. Not Sanctus Heliara's poisoned atmosphere, but clean air above an ocean world whose name existed in no Imperial archive. Gaia. The wound held for 3 seconds. Long enough for Sephiroth to mark its position, to imprint its coordinates into his consciousness, to verify that dimensional barriers could indeed be sutured when the surgeon understood the anatomy. Then it collapsed. The planet's death continued. Magma fountains reached toward orbit. The atmosphere burned away. Surface temperature climbed past levels that could sustain any known form of organic life. Aboard Retribution's hammer, Lord Admiral Holt watched Sanctus Heliara die through her main view screen. She logged the action in her personal records. Exterminatus executed per inquisitorial authorization. Planetary purge successful. Anomaly presumed eliminated. But her sensors showed something her analysts could not explain. For exactly 3 seconds during the planet's death throes, warp readings had spiked in configurations that matched no known phenomenon. The disturbance registered across multiple frequencies simultaneously, then vanished as if it had never existed. She flagged the data for Inquisitor Kessel's review and filed it under unexplained phenomena requiring further investigation. In the void, where Sanctus Heliara had burned a silver thread, hung for exactly 1 heartbeat longer than physics said was possible. Then it too faded, leaving only radiation and debris. The Imperium had provided the shock. Sephiroth had proved the theorem. What remained was execution. Somewhere in the warp's endless screaming chaos, Tzeentch's architect calculated probabilities and found them delicious. The null field hit Sephiroth like silence made physical. One moment the warp's constant background pressure, that tidal pull of souls and psychic screaming surrounded him. The next, nothing. Absolute void where immaterial forces should exist. His boots touched down on black stone that drank light rather than reflecting it. Necrodermis architecture stretched in geometric perfection across the relay station's exterior. Pyramidal structures connected by elevated causeways, every angle calculated for some purpose. Biological minds would never intuit. Green energy pulsed through conduits buried beneath transparent flooring, illuminating circuit patterns that predated the Imperium by millions of years. Sephiroth steadied himself against the sensory deprivation. This was the pariah nexus, where Necron pylons generated null fields that strangled the warp into submission. His connection to metaphysical forces guttered like a candle in hurricane winds. The abilities he relied upon in Sanctus Heliara's burning streets, reading intent, bending perception, manipulating souls, all reduced to static whispers. What remained was physical capability and cold intellect. Acceptable. He moved across the causeway toward Relay 17's maintenance annex. Ahriman's stolen stellar charts had identified this location as a peripheral node critical for null field stability, but defended by minimal forces. One cryptech. Canoptech constructs for automated maintenance. No warrior cohorts, no tomb complexes. A target he could reach before the Necrons mobilize their immortal legions. The annex entrance stood open. Not carelessness, the Necrons had no concept of infiltration by individual agents. Their warfare operated on scales of fleets and dynasties. A single organism penetrating their infrastructure was statistically insignificant, until it wasn't. Sephiroth stepped through the portal. Interior lighting shifted from green to amber scanners, analyzing his molecular structure against threat databases that contained every xeno species the Necrons had encountered across 60 million years. His biological composition matched nothing in their archives. The alert was silent, instantaneous, transmitted through quantum entanglement to every Necron consciousness within the relay's operational sphere. Cryptech Nexset registered the intrusion with the same dispassion it applied to all data inputs. Unknown organism. Unclassified threat profile. Response terminate and analyze remains. The Cryptech's Canoptech cloak activated suspensor fields, lifting its skeletal frame from the chamber's central workstation. Mechadendrites extended from its torso housing, each appendage tipped with tools designed to maintain technology older than most galaxies' current civilizations. Those tools could also disassemble organic matter with surgical efficiency. Nexet's ocular sensors focused on the intruder now descending the maintenance shaft toward the node chamber. Combat probability algorithms, processed movement patterns, threat assessment protocols, optimal elimination vectors. Conclusion standard: Xenos infiltrator. Minimal danger to primary systems. Recommended action: deploy. Constructs contain threat harvest biomass for analysis. The Cryptech transmitted activation codes to the nearest Canoptech Wraith Patrol. 3 constructs phased into existence around Sephiroth, their dimensional displacement drives, allowing materialization inside solid matter. Serpentine bodies of living metal coiled through the air phase shifters, flickering as they transitioned between states of matter. Particle casters mounted along their spines locked targeting solutions. Sephiroth's blade moved before the casters fired. Masamune traced an arc that intersected all 3 wraiths, simultaneously exploiting the half-second vulnerability when they solidified for attack. The edge didn't cut through necrodermis that would require sustained force against self-repairing molecular bonds. But it found the seams where phase shifter housings connected to main chassis assemblies. One wraith's phase drive shattered. Its body locked mid-transition between states half-corporeal flesh and half-quantum uncertainty. The internal contradiction tore it apart at the molecular level. The other 2 adapted. Their targeting algorithms recalculated based on observed combat data. This organism demonstrated reflexes exceeding biological norms. Adjust firing patterns to compensate for enhanced response times. They fired. Green lightning arced from particle casters, each beam capable of stripping atoms from molecular bonds. Sephiroth moved between the beams, using the same principle he had employed against Grey Knight storm bolters, reading angle of fire through weapon positioning, calculating trajectory existing elsewhere when the destruction arrived. But the null field hampered him. Without warp-enhanced perception, he relied purely on physical observation. One beam grazed his shoulder, disintegrating leather and scoring flesh beneath. The wound cauterized instantly from the beam's heat, preventing blood loss, but marking his first injury since arriving in this universe. The Wraiths pressed their advantage, circling in patterns designed to eliminate evasion vectors. Their particle casters charged for simultaneous discharge from opposing angles. Sephiroth dropped. Flat against the chamber floor, he let both beams pass overhead and intersect where his torso had been. The Wraith's own weapons fire collided, creating a feedback pulse that disrupted their phase shifters. They flickered, momentarily vulnerable. He was already moving. Masamune punched through the nearest Wraith's ocular housing, the one component that couldn't phase shift while maintaining sensory input. The construct's consciousness core fragmented. Its body collapsed into component scarabs that scattered across the floor individual units, attempting emergency reintegration protocols. The final Wraith initiated tactical withdrawal, phasing through the chamber wall to regroup with reinforcements. Sephiroth let it go. The node chamber lay ahead. He descended the final access shaft and emerged into a space that defied conventional physics. The chamber existed in 4 spatial dimensions simultaneously, its walls folding through angles that would drive unaugmented human minds into catatonia. At the center, the node matrix, a crystalline structure pulsing with mathematical absolutes that generated the null field's stabilizing equations. Cryptek next set stood before the matrix, skeletal fingers interfacing directly with control systems. Its translated Vox output came in flat binaric cant that Sephiroth's enhanced cognition decoded automatically. Organic intruder, classification unknown, threat assessment elevated, termination authorized. The Cryptek raised one mechadendrite. The appendage's tip reconfigured into a Gauss flare emitter, miniaturized but functional. Green energy gathered at the muzzle. Sephiroth closed the distance in 3 strides. Next set fired. The Gauss beam struck center mass molecular disruption field, expanding outward to flay flesh from bone. But Sephiroth had angled his approach to place the matrix directly behind him. The Cryptek's own weapon threatened its most critical infrastructure. The beam cut off after 0.2 seconds. Tactical override risk to primary systems exceeds termination priority. Sephiroth's hand closed around the Cryptek's cranial housing. His other hand drove Masamune through the mechadendrite cluster connecting Nexet to the node matrix. Sparks erupted from severed data conduits. The Cryptek's phase-out protocol engaged. Its consciousness began transferring to backup substrate, preparing for resurrection in a replacement body. But the transfer required intact communication links to the resurrection protocols. Sephiroth twisted. The cranial housing separated from the spinal housing with a shriek of tortured necrodermis. The phase-out stuttered mid-sequence Nexet's consciousness, fragmenting across severed connection points. In that fragmented state, the Cryptek could no longer resist when Sephiroth accessed its direct interface with the node matrix. The glyph key protocols, the dimensional anchor configurations, the harmonic frequencies required to stabilize warp tiers using Blackstone architecture, all of it stored in crystalline memory, waiting for extraction. Sephiroth pulled the data directly into his own neural architecture. The information burned itself into his mind through channels that bypassed conventional learning, raw transfer of engineering absolutes from machine consciousness to biological substrate. The process took 4 seconds. Behind him, the Wraith he had allowed to escape returned with reinforcements. A full canoptech phalanx materialized in the Chamber 6, Wraith's 12 scarabs and 3 spiders coordinating the swarm through quantum-linked combat protocols. Sephiroth released the Cryptek's remains and ran. The phalanx pursued with mechanical certainty. No rage, no vengeance. Simple elimination protocols, executing according to threat response hierarchies. He sprinted through the annex corridors as Gauss weapons carved through walls behind him. Scarabs swarmed along the ceiling, their cutting beams, attempting to drop debris on his escape route. Wraiths phased through obstacles, maintaining pursuit angles that would eventually converge. Sephiroth's stolen tactical data included relay schematic layouts. He knew which corridors led to external egress points, which chambers could be collapsed to create temporary barriers, which power conduits, if severed, would trigger localized shutdowns. He exploited each advantage with calculated precision. A support column took Masamune through its structural core. The ceiling section above it sagged, forcing the spiders to deploy stabilization fields instead of pursuit. Bought him 6 seconds. A power junction ruptured from a strike angled to maximize energy discharge. Green lightning arced across the corridor, creating electromagnetic interference that disrupted Scarab coordination. 10 seconds. An emergency blast door designed to contain reactor breaches received precise cuts along its locking mechanism. It slammed shut on pneumatic pressures, separating him from the Wraith vanguard. 15 seconds. The exterior causeway appeared ahead. Beyond it, the void between stars and the small ship he had hidden in the relay's sensor shadow, using techniques stolen from inquisitorial stealth protocols. The blast door behind him exploded. Wraiths poured through their phase shifters, overloading the mechanism that should have delayed them by minutes. They had sacrificed 3 units to generate enough destabilization energy to breach the door immediately. Acceptable losses for threat elimination. Sephiroth reached the causeway and jumped, free fall through vacuum. His stolen ship's automated systems detected his emergency transponder and fired thrusters angling to intercept his trajectory. 15 seconds to rendezvous. The Wraiths emerged onto the causeway behind him. Their particle casters tracked his falling form. Firing solutions locked. They fired. Beams converged on his position. The ship's hull, already damaged from its forced insertion into the pariah nexus, took multiple hits. Armor plating vaporized. Internal systems failed. But the vessel's momentum carried it into intercept range. Sephiroth caught the extended boarding ramp with his free hand, pulled himself inside as the ship's thrusters burned at maximum acceleration, tearing away from the relay before heavier Necron assets could mobilize. Behind him, the Canoptech constructs transmitted final pursuit data to the Tomb fleet. Unknown organism escaped with classified node architecture. Recommended response full deployment authorization. But the Tomb fleet's awakening protocols required time the intruder no longer needed to give them. By the time Necron destroyers translated into real space, the stolen vessel had already disappeared into the void between systems. In the damaged cockpit, Sephiroth examined the shoulder wound the Wraith had inflicted. The flesh would regenerate. The data he had stolen would not be lost. He now possessed everything required to anchor dimensional tears using Necron null field theory, adapted for warp manipulation. The thread he had glimpsed during Sanctus Heliara's death could be woven into permanent structure. Gaia was accessible. What remained was execution during the next apocalypse the Imperium would inevitably generate. His ship limped toward the nearest warp-capable zone, trailing reactor coolant and carrying knowledge that would let him suture wounds across the skin of existence itself. The tear in space hung 300,000 kilometers from where Sanctus Heliara had died. Sensors aboard Retribution's hammer registered it as a warp anomaly, exhibiting impossible stability, no expansion, no collapse, no chaotic hemorrhage. Just a wound held open by mathematics, the Mechanicus cogitators rejected as theoretically invalid. Inquisitor Kessel stood in the observation deck, watching the anomaly through reinforced viewports that filtered radiation across 17 spectrums. The wound was small, barely 15 meters in diameter. Through it, blue sky, white clouds, the curve of an ocean that stretched beyond visual range, a world that had no right to exist on the other side of dimensional barriers. "Deploy probe," Kessel ordered. In the launch bay, tech priests blessed a servo probe with oils and incantations that acknowledged the machine spirit's willingness to serve unto destruction. The probe was expendable, designed for hostile reconnaissance where human life would be wasted on initial contact. Magnetic rails hurled it toward the tear. The probe crossed the threshold and transmitted. Visual feed coastline. Vegetation in configurations. The Administratum's botanical archives would classify as Terran analog but genetically unmodified. No industrial complexes, no hive spires, no signs of human habitation conforming to Imperial settlement patterns. Atmospheric composition breathable. Temperature within acceptable human tolerance ranges. Radiation levels negligible. Kessel's augmetic eye processed the feed with suspicion hardened by 4 decades of discovering corruption disguised as paradise. Beautiful worlds were weapons. Pristine environments were traps. Anything that appeared welcoming in this universe of suffering existed to kill in ways conventional warfare could not. Auspex analysis, he commanded. The tech priest monitoring sensor feeds responded in clipped binaric that Kessel's translation implant rendered as gothic. No warp signature detected within observable radius, no psychic emanations, no demonic presence. However, the priest's mechadendrites twitched. There exists an energy field the probe's instrumentation cannot categorize. Not electromagnetic, not gravitic, not warp-derived, unknown classification. Composition, analyzing. The priest interfaced directly with the probe's sensor array, pulling raw spectroscopic readings. The field appears to be spiritual in nature, comparable to soul resonance, but lacking individual consciousness markers. It pervades the entire observable biosphere like background radiation, but concentrated near organic matter. Kessel activated his Vox link to the astropathic choir aboard his personal vessel, the Spear of Judgment. This is Inquisitor Kessel. I require psychic probe of the dimensional breach. Standard depth scan, minimal exposure. The response came from Choir Master Valen, her voice already carrying the strain of maintaining telepathic networks across fleet assets. Acknowledged, my lord. Commencing scan. In the choir chamber aboard the Spear of Judgment, 5 astropaths sat in consecrated circles, their minds linked through psychic rapport maintained by discipline and neural conditioning. Valen directed their collective consciousness toward the tear, extending their awareness like fingers probing a wound. The feedback hit them immediately, not hostile, not sentient, just vast. An ocean of spiritual energy that existed where the warp should have been, but operated according to principles that had nothing to do with chaos or the Imperium's roiling madness. The astropaths touched it and felt the touch returned not malicious, but incomprehensible, like pressing against a sleeping god who noticed but did not wake. Astropath Kelvin screamed first. His neural architecture, optimized for navigating warp currents and filtering demonic whispers, encountered something his conditioning had no framework to process. The foreign energy flooded his consciousness, seeking equilibrium with his psychic presence the way water seeks level. His mind shattered, trying to contain what it could not understand. Blood vessels ruptured across his brain. Synaptic connections fused. He convulsed once and went still, his last conscious thought transmitted across the choir link before his death. Too clean, too bright, too alive, it sees me. It sees. 2 more astropaths followed him into catatonic collapse. Their neural patterns flatlined or locked into recursive loops that medical intervention could not interrupt. Valen severed the link and triggered emergency neural dampeners. The remaining astropaths gasped as the connection terminated, but the damage had already registered. 3 casualties, 2 permanent vegetative states, 1 dead. She activated direct Vox to Kessel. Her voice came ragged with shock. My lord, the probe was unsuccessful. The energy field beyond the breach is incompatible with human psychic architecture. It does not attack. It simply is. And our contact with it produces rejection. Rejection, like antibodies responding to infection, my lord. The field detects our psychic presence and attempts to harmonize. But the harmonization process destroys our neural pathways. It is not hostile. It is simply too different from what our minds are designed to interface with. Kessel absorbed this. 3 astropaths lost to make contact with an energy field that killed through incompatibility rather than malice. The calculus was clear. Whatever existed beyond that, Tear operated according to laws that made human psychic ability a liability rather than an asset. Terminate psychic reconnaissance, he ordered. Deploy null contingent. The Sisters of Silence boarded their transport without ceremony. These women born with the pariah gene that negated psychic phenomena through their mere presence moved in absolute quiet. No vox chatter. No liturgies. Just professional silence as they prepared equipment designed to function in environments where the warp did not exist. Sister Superior Novena reviewed her squad's loadout. 15 sisters. Standard pariah-rated arms and armor. Null field amplifiers that would extend their innate anti-psychic aura to cover a 30-meter radius. Medical servitors equipped with monitoring instruments calibrated for baseline human physiology. Their mission: traverse the breach, conduct ground reconnaissance, return within 6 hours, or be considered lost. The transport launched. It crossed the threshold and descended toward Gaia's surface. The sisters felt the change immediately. That constant pressure of the warp, the background noise of countless souls screaming across the Imperium simply ceased, replaced by nothing. Perfect psychic silence. For a pariah, this was baseline existence. For anyone else, the absence would have been maddening. The transport touched down on a beach where waves broke against sand that had never known industrial pollution. Novena disembarked first bolter-ready null field amplifier, active at maximum output. The energy field Valen had described pressed against her awareness like atmosphere pressing against skin. Present. Undeniable, but unable to penetrate the psychic void the sisters generated. The null field created a bubble of blank space within the spiritual ocean, and the ocean simply flowed around it without resistance. Secure perimeter, Novena signed to her squad. Standard tactical deployment executed in silence. The sisters fanned out across the beach, sensors sweeping for threats. Biological scans showed native fauna, small creatures, nothing that registered as hostile. The vegetation swayed in wind that carried scents uncorrupted by promethium exhaust or Hablock waste. One of the medical servitors triggered an alarm. Its atmospheric analysis had detected something the initial probe missed: trace organic compounds in the air that matched human metabolic byproducts. Someone had been here. Recently, Novena accessed the servitor's readings. The compounds were concentrated inland beyond the tree line. She gestured. The squad moved inland bolters, sweeping potential ambush positions. They found the first marker 2 kilometers from the beach. A stone pillar, smooth, deliberate, carved with symbols that matched no imperial lexicon, but carried unmistakable intentionality. At its base, offerings, flowers that bloomed in colors the administratum would classify as genetically unstable. Small woven objects, fabric strips tied in patterns that suggested ritual significance. And at the pillar's apex, a name carved in script that predated the Imperium. Aerith. Novena transmitted visual feedback to the fleet. This world was not uninhabited. This world had been touched by something that left markers. This world carried significance to forces unknown. Aboard Retribution's Hammer, Kessel reviewed the sisters' feed with Lord Admiral Holt standing at his shoulder. They watched the pillar recording in silence. Then Holt spoke. Recommendations, Inquisitor. Kessel's response came without hesitation. Quarantine the breach. Nothing crosses in either direction without my personal authorization. Deploy screening stations, Any vessel attempting to investigate is to be detained and crew subjected to full purge examination. And the world beyond, mark it as Perditus class anomaly, unauthorized dimension, potential vector for pan-galactic contamination. Kessel turned from the view screen. If that tear cannot be sealed within 72 hours, we collapse it through sustained bombardment of the surrounding spatial coordinates. Holt's jaw tightened. You would destroy the breach itself. Better to lose potential intelligence than risk whatever created those markers gaining access to Imperial space. Kessel's augmetic eye whirred as it refocused. That world is beautiful, Lord Admiral. In this universe, beauty is always bait. On Gaia's surface, Sister Superior Novena received the recall order. She signaled her squad. They withdrew to the transport, leaving the pillar and its offerings undisturbed. The transport lifted off, crossed back through the tear, re-entered Imperial space where the warp's screaming madness pressed against reality like a starving predator. Behind them, Gaia's ocean breathed. The spiritual field that had killed 3 astropaths pulsed with rhythms older than the Imperium, older than humanity's first steps among the stars. It detected the intrusion, registered the touch of minds that operated according to different laws, and in the way that immune systems remember infection, began adapting its response for the next contact. The dimensional wound pulsed wider. What had been 15 meters now stretched to 50, the breach stabilizing as Sephiroth channeled stolen Necron anchor technology into its edges. Mathematical absolutes etched themselves into the fabric of space, holding the rupture open against reality's natural healing. He floated in the void between universes, drawing power from the chaos erupting around him. 3 fleets converged on his position. Imperial Navy assets, Retribution's Hammer and its escort squadron maintained firing solutions with lance batteries, hot and torpedo tubes loaded. Lord Admiral Holt's tactical display showed optimal bombardment vectors, but she held fire. Inquisitor Kessel had ordered containment before destruction, and containment required understanding what they faced. From the opposite vector, chaos warships translated into real space trailing corruption and screaming warp stuff. Black Legion cruisers bearing Abaddon's 8-pointed star, their hulls festooned with bones and prayer strips written in languages that drove reading servitors insane. They had come to claim the entity that had suture wounds in reality, to bind it as a tool for the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade. And from the third approach, Necron tomb ships, their living metal hulls, older than human civilization. The stolen node architecture triggered response directives coded into tomb fleet consciousness millions of years before humanity's ancestors had discovered fire. Retrieve technology, eliminate thieves, resume dormancy. 3 forces, 3 objectives, 0 coordination. The battle ignited. Imperial lance batteries spoke first. Coherent light carved through vacuum targeting chaos vessels with prejudice born from 10,000 years of religious hatred. Void shields flared on Black Legion cruisers, absorbing energy that could have carved continents. The Necrons responded with Gauss arrays that stripped matter at the atomic level. Green lightning arced across void space, intersecting Imperial torpedo volleys and reducing the warheads to constituent elements before detonation. Retribution's Hammer's void shields buckled under the assault emergency power rerouting to maintain defensive integrity. Chaos answered both with warp fire. Demon engines aboard the Black Legion flagship discharged reality-bending energies that ignored conventional physics. Immaterial flames washed over Necron hull plating, seeking consciousness to corrupt. The tomb ships registered the assault as irritating, but ineffective Necrons possessed no souls to twist. Sephiroth observed the 3-way carnage and prepared his ascension. The dimensional wound connected him to Gaia's soul ocean. That vast reservoir of spiritual essence, the life stream, flowed into him like water into a drought-stricken vessel. Not the corrupt madness of the warp, but pure, concentrated existence distilled from a world where life and death formed cycles instead of screaming chaos. His form began to shift. Additional limbs erupted from his torso, each one perfect and terrible. Wings manifested, not biological tissue, but condensed, will-shaped into membranes that caught dimensional currents. His single blade multiplied each weapon, a reflection of Masamune held in hands that should not exist on a baseline human frame. Proto-safer. The threshold between flesh and concept. Not yet the angel of despair he would become, but no longer constrained by single-body limitations. Aboard Retribution's Hammer Navigator, Pella shrieked as his warp-attuned consciousness touched the life stream flowing through the breach. The foreign essence flooded his third eye, seeking harmonization with something that operated according to completely different principles. His neural architecture, optimized for Imperium navigation, shattered trying to process clean soul energy that had never known chaos. Blood wept from his forehead. His attendants rushed forward, but the damage was irreversible. Pellis collapsed, another casualty to incompatibility between dimensions. Lord Admiral Holt received the casualty report and marked it. Navigator lost. Warp transit capability compromised. Fleet mobility reduced by 40%. The cost of this engagement climbed with every passing second. Inquisitor, she voxed to Kessel aboard his personal vessel. We cannot sustain this. 3 hostile fleet elements, dimensional anomaly expanding Navigator core, taking catastrophic losses from proximity to the breach. Recommend immediate exterminatus level response. Kessel's response came sharp. Denied. The anomaly must be contained, not destroyed. Destroying it may destabilize the entire subsector's warp geography. We seal it now. He activated fleet-wide command frequency. All vessels, this is Inquisitor Lord Kessel, invoking Ordo Malleus authority. Disengage from hostile fleets and focus all assets on dimensional breach containment. Grey Knights execute closure rights. Sisters of Silence maximum null field projection. Navy prepare for directed bombardment on my authorization. The Imperial forces shifted formation. This close to the breach, the life stream's influence made warp-based tactics unreliable. Psychers aboard every ship registered feedback that ranged from disorienting to lethal. But the Sisters of Silence, those psychic voids in human form, found their innate anti-warp nature suddenly amplified. Where the life stream met their null aura, both forces canceled into perfect absence. Sister Superior Novena stood in the teleportarium aboard the strike cruiser. Emperor's Judgment, surrounded by 14 of her sisters. Their pariah genes created a bubble of absolute psychic silence that expanded as tech priests activated null field amplifiers to maximum output. Prepare for combat insertion, she signed to her squad. Target breach epicenter. Mission anchor null field at dimensional wound edge. Duration until rites complete or termination. The teleport homers engaged. Novena materialized in hard vacuum, 15 meters from where Sephiroth floated in his transforming state. The life stream flowing around him recoiled from the sister's presence like living tissue shrinking from flame. A sphere of dead space formed around the pariahs, cutting him off from the soul ocean that fed his ascension. Sephiroth felt the connection sever. The power sustaining his transformation guttered. His additional limbs began to dissolve manifestation, failing without continuous spiritual fuel. He turned his attention to the sisters with cold recognition. They were weapons specifically designed to kill what he was becoming. Acceptable. He moved. Even reduced to near baseline capability, he remained apex predator. Masamune swept through vacuum in an arc calculated to intersect multiple targets, despite Void Combat's lack of air resistance to guide movement. One sister died, her helmet breached and flash frozen, before her nervous system registered the cut. The others returned fire. Bolters spoke in silence, muzzle flares the only indication of discharge. Mass reactive shells converged on Sephiroth from 8 vectors simultaneously. He dodged 6, deflected one with his blade. The eighth struck his shoulder, detonating against flesh and bone with force that would have crippled unaugmented humans. Sephiroth's regeneration sealed the wound, but slower now. Without the life stream, his biology reverted to limits. The sisters pressed their advantage, maintaining null field cohesion while firing disciplined volleys that forced him into defensive patterns. Aboard the strike cruiser, Justicar Thane led his Grey Knight strike team through final preparations. The teleportation would deposit them at the breach's edge, where they would execute the rite of dimensional severance, a liturgy so potent that speaking it wrong could tear the ritualist's soul from their body. "Brothers," Thane spoke through helmet vox, "we have faced this entity before. It adapted. It learned. It demonstrated capacity that exceeds standard threat models, but it is not invulnerable. The sisters have proven that." His squad responded with unified acknowledgement. 10 Grey Knights, each bearing weapons blessed against every known form of corruption. They teleported. Reality folded. The Grey Knights materialized in formation around the dimensional wound, their Aegis armor's wards blazing with active power. They began the rite, immediately voices synchronized through VoxLink to maintain perfect liturgical harmony. The words they spoke were older than the Imperium recovered from Dark Age archives that predated the Emperor's unification of Terra. Each syllable carried weight that pressed against the immaterial like hammers shaping steel. The dimensional wound shuddered. Sephiroth felt the change immediately. The mathematics holding the breach open began to invert the Grey Knight's rite, rewriting fundamental principles. The wound no longer pulled open, it pushed closed dimensional barriers, reasserting themselves according to liturgical command. But the rite also did something else. It redirected the flow. The life stream pouring through the breach found its vector reversed. Instead of flowing into Imperial space, the soul energy now pushed back toward Gaia, creating spiritual back pressure that threatened to destabilize the entire rupture. Sephiroth recognized the trap. They were not trying to kill him through force. They were converting the breach into a one-way channel that would expel him back to Gaia's dimension, while simultaneously sealing the wound behind him. Banishment through spatial geometry and theological manipulation. He attempted to counter, but the sisters' null field prevented him from accessing the power needed to resist. His proto-Safer form collapsed entirely, leaving him in baseline human configuration, wounded, depleted, facing coordinated assault from forces that had solved his threat profile. Lord Admiral Holt received Justicar Thane's signal right, achieving desired effect dimensional wound, now configured for expulsion rather than access. She spoke the words that would end this. "All batteries. Target dimensional breach edges with sustained lance fire. Maximum yield. Authorization Inquisitor Kessel Ordo Malleus. 23 lance batteries opened fire simultaneously. Coherent light beams converged on the breach's spatial boundaries, the specific coordinates where Thane's right had weakened dimensional integrity. The bombardment did not target Sephiroth. It targeted the wound itself, hammering the space-time fabric that the Grey Knights had already softened through liturgy. The breach began to collapse, not the slow, natural healing, but forced closure under directed energy that followed the vectors Grey Knight ritual had established. The wound contracted dimensional edges pulling toward each other with increasing speed. Sephiroth had seconds to decide resist and be crushed between collapsing dimensional barriers or retreat through the rupture to Gaia before it sealed completely. He chose survival. His form accelerated toward the breach, crossing back through the threshold, even as the wound compressed around him. The sisters' null field released its hold. The life stream embraced him once more, pulling him back into Gaia's dimension, with force amplified by the Grey Knight's redirection. He tumbled through blue sky, fell toward ocean below. The breach sealed above him with a sound like reality, remembering how to be whole. Aboard Retribution's Hammer Lord, Admiral Holt watched the dimensional wound close completely. Auspex confirmed no residual tears, no lingering instabilities, no connection between Imperial space and whatever lay beyond. She logged the engagement dimensional anomaly contained through coordinated ordo-malleus operation. Casualties acceptable. Threat neutralized. Inquisitor Kessel stood beside her augmetic eye, reviewing battle recordings that would be sealed under Vermilion clearance and forgotten by official history. Mark Gaia's coordinates as Perditus Absolute. Any future detection of similar dimensional breaches in that vector is to trigger immediate exterminatus of the surrounding volume. Understood, Inquisitor. Holt turned to her tactical officer. Disengage from hostile fleet elements. All vessels assume defensive formation and prepare for warp transit once navigators recover. The Imperial fleet withdrew, leaving the Chaos and Necron forces to murder each other without interference. The Black Legion had lost their prize. The Necrons had failed to recover stolen technology. Both would claim victory in their own chronicles, while Imperial records would note only anomaly purged. Sector secured. On Gaia's surface, Sephiroth pulled himself from the ocean. His body bore wounds that would take days to fully regenerate. The knowledge he had stolen remained intact, but the dimensional wound was gone. His pathway to exploiting Imperial purges had been sealed by enemies who understood that overwhelming force was less effective than surgical precision. He stood on a beach unmarked by millennia of war and looked toward sky that showed no tear, no breach, no connection to the universe he had briefly touched. The Imperium had won this engagement through doctrine and coordination. But Gaia remained accessible. The life stream still flowed. And Sephiroth now understood exactly how the Imperium fought threats they could not simply destroy. They adapted, they studied, they systematized. So would he. Overhead clouds drifted across skies that had never known orbital bombardment. The ocean breathed. And in the place where dimensional barriers had torn open, a scar remained invisible to normal perception, but permanent in the fabric of existence. The Imperium had closed the wound. But scars remember pressure, and wounds once opened never truly forget how to bleed. The Imperium sealed its records. Sanctus Heliara became a footnote marked Exterminatus Xenos Incursion. 3 billion deaths filed under acceptable losses. The dimensional breach classified as Perditus Absolute, coordinates flagged for immediate purge if detected again. But some things cannot be erased through administrative decree. Inquisitor Kessel's sealed reports circulated among Ordo Malleus archives. A new threat category emerged: entities exhibiting non-warp metaphysical capabilities immune to standard psychic countermeasures, requiring null contingent response protocols. The Grey Knights updated their combat doctrines. The Sisters of Silence found their strategic value reassessed. Across the segmentum, astropaths whispered of silver threads in the immaterium places where dimensional barriers remembered being cut. Navigators reported anomalous readings near former conflict zones, spatial scars that refused to heal according to natural law. And on Gaia, in an ocean untouched by Imperial fire, something patient studied the techniques used against it. The Imperium had taught valuable lessons about systematic warfare, coordinated doctrine, and the power of turning apocalypse into opportunity. Sephiroth would not forget those lessons, neither would the scars.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.